So, after the tribulation, the sun and the moon go dark. Sun and the moon go dark, then it's the tribulation. Whatever. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 24 today, and how it makes a lot more sense to look at the framework and understand your rapture and second coming verses. I'm going to go through this real quick. The first part of Matthew 24, you can see an absolute correlation to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first 4 seals being broken, 5th one, 6th one, it goes on and on. Then there's some general, then you get to verse 15, and you've got the abomination of desolation, which is in the tribulation. Then you go on, there's some more stuff, and you get to verse 28, and it says, wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. It says the same thing in Revelation 19, verses 17 and 18. The angel says to the fowls of the air, eat at the supper of the great God. Eat the flesh of the kings and captains and mighty men, all this, the horses. There's so much death and destruction during this period. It is obviously Daniel's 70th week, time of Jacob's trouble, Israel's trouble, and the rest of the wicked world. So you go to 29, and you go, see, after the tribulation, sun and the moon go dark. Alright, let me make a point about this. The sun and the moon going dark in verse 29 is not the same as Joel 2:31. Joel 2:31 says the sun would go dark and the moon would be turned to blood. I know, it's the same thing, right? It's they say a blood moon, solar eclipse, darkness, same thing. And I'm fine with that, really. But what's really interesting is just that it was said differently, so maybe we should pay attention to it differently. Maybe we should actually realize that there's possibly a difference between the sun and the moon going dark and the sun into darkness and the moon into blood. In verse 31 of Joel 2, it says, before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Okay. So anyway, the point here is this. Before Joel 2:31 says that the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the tribulation. So before all this happens, you're over here, and I bet you it's kind of like things are almost like normal. There's probably going to be a period of time where people are just eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, planting, building, that kind of thing. Kind of like normal times. And during this period of time is going to be the blood moons. I know that the blood moon tetrads are much more rare. This is the point here about this whole thing with Joel 2:31 and Matthew 24:29, and this anchor of the sun and the moon going dark. Not a strong anchor. Not in Matthew 24:29. It's not. Joel 2:31 is pretty clear, though. I like the way it's said because it actually references the moon to blood. We've been calling these blood moon tetrads, blood moons. Whenever the moon goes dark, that could happen for other reasons, and it also could go in, or it could happen outside of a tetrad. It could be a lone blood moon. It could be totally alone, or it could have a different sequence, something that's not on the Lord's feast days, and that would be a lot less. It is simply scientifically and factually a lot less rare to have a blood moon. We had one a month or two ago. Just because there were some raging wildfires in North America, people saw a blood moon. Whatever. The point is that the tetrad is the rarity. The singularity of them in different times is not quite nearly as rare. So Joel 2:31 still has its place, saying that before the tribulation you'll see the blood moon tetrads, what I believe. Because we know that there are also solar eclipses in between these tetrads, so it carries such heavy weight and significance. In verse 29 of Matthew 24, I'm not saying it's not a blood moon, it very well may be, but it's not necessarily saying that it's one of the tetrad either. There's nothing to, and it doesn't say that in Joel 2:31 either, not that the tetrad is, but the point here is that there could be a difference between these two events, because Matthew 24:29 says the sun and the moon go dark, and then this one says the sun goes dark and the moon into blood. Like I said, tetrads are rare, and those are certainly before the tribulation. But we know that we have this, at least, and I'm not denying this verse. This will happen. Okay, I do believe the Word of God. King James Version. And beyond that, I mean, go into Hebrew. Look at what it was really originally written in, and look at the Greek. Check out some of that stuff. Greek, Hebrew, whatever. Anyway, point here is that the disciples asked Jesus about his second coming and the end of the world and his second coming. Sorry. So he graciously tells them that. You see the mirror. You see the beginning in the beginning of Matthew 24. You see the midpoint. And then you see the end. But at the end is not the rapture. Right here. This is where the second coming comes into play. So on my chart, it's correct here. Second coming happens after the tribulation. Second coming, that's what you're looking at in Matthew 24, 29 through 31. The beginning is where the rapture takes place. Okay? Why is it out of order? Because I'm going to show you that the next thing Christ is going to talk about before he leaves this conversation is the rapture. You don't get any clue in verse 32 that he walked off and started talking to somebody else. He's still talking to the disciples. This conversation doesn't end until you get to about Matthew chapter 26. So I'm going to show you the framework of Matthew 24 and Matthew 25. Verse 32, he says, "Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh." So before summer, you've got this sign. Before the tribulation, before the day of the Lord, before all hell breaks loose, before the first part of Matthew 24, 24a I'm going to call verses 3 through 31. I want to call that Matthew 24a. Matthew 24b is when Christ is going to be like, hey guys, before that, I want to tell you about something else you need to know so you can be a part of that that rapture, that apo, that removing from the surface of an object. I want to take you guys with me, like he says in John 14. So likewise, when you see all these things, that it is near, even at the doors. Guys, we're really close to this event when you start to see these things. We've been seeing this tribulation coming for years and years and years and years and years. So we're all paying attention. Okay? Verse 34, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Whatever. I'm not going to get into the preterists. They're crazy. "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." So here's something where it's like, hey, post-trib, pre-trib, mid-trib, whatever. Let's just realize, this is a point to acknowledge our Savior and say, whether they're right or we're right or whatever, we know that Jesus is right. We all at least pay attention to prophecy, and know that his words are true. And that's what, verse 35, he's saying, hey, it's all going to happen, guys. But here's where I'm going to tell you that I've got so much more ammo to go with this, seeing that these things are going to happen before the tribulation, because here in verse 36, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man." He references the day and the hour that no man knoweth. That is an idiomatic phrase referencing Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. In all biblical, especially Old Testament and Jewish ways, Israelite days, however you want to say it, that represents the rapture date. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when you study that, represents in all ways the second coming, the lion coming back. Jesus as the lion. He came the first time as the lamb. He was our Passover. He did that on the day of Passover. So he will fulfill Yom Teruah on the new moon in September or October. I strongly believe that there will be a rapture. 2 in the field, 1 left, the other taken. What just happened? Rapture. But listen, that's very serious. I know I'm joking around, I sound lighthearted, but you have to understand that what he's saying here is a reference to that in verse 36. He's referencing that to a culture that knows this stuff. We Western Christians are so far removed from understanding the Lord's feast days. We're removed from the mystery in a big way, because I'm telling you, they are encoded. Look at a video called Rosh Hashanah and Its Hidden Secret by Andre Hendricks. And it's chopped up into like 7 parts, but just watch it. It'll explain it to you. And then The second part of verse 36, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. That's also a reference to the same kind of thing, the same picture. It's actually a reference to the ancient Jewish wedding, but I'm going to posit that that also completely represents the rapture. You should look at that. There's a video by Dr. Ankerberg. He's talking about the ancient Jewish wedding. It's like an 8-minute video by an old guy a long time ago. I think his name's Dr. Reynolds Showers. I shouldn't just call him an old guy. I'd love to meet him. But anyway, the point is, both of those, there's 2 or 3 idiomatic references to the rapture in that it's a type and shadow. It's in the ancient Jewish wedding. The type and shadow of the rapture is also in Yom Teruah. I could go a lot more into that, but that's for another time. But as it was in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, so before the chaos and death, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Jesus himself, guys, is referencing the coming of the Son of Man in both parts of Matthew 24. So are there 2 comings? Yes. Dr. Hovind, I will at least give credit to him having the rapture before the second coming on his chart. But, you know, he's really supposed to put the rapture before the chaos and death. Okay? That's the point. Don't get too hung up on like, oh, well, you know, they were taken, I don't know. So I don't know how they even get that confused, because when you look at verses 40 through 42, the word taken is paralambano, to take up alongside. Like, I'm not going to stop and I'm not coming to your house. I'm stopping at the curb. Hop in, we're late to the movies. You know, that kind of thing. I'm stealing all this from Alan Horvath, Scotty Clark, Perry Stone, but I hope that I'm showing it to people at least in a new way, a framework to understand that there is framework to this. Matthew 24 and 25. Matthew 24a, 3 through 31, is the tribulation and the second coming. It's out of order because that's how the disciples asked. They didn't know quite what they should about the rapture. So Christ makes it a point to keep the conversation going in verse 32 and from there on in Matthew 24. And look how obvious this gets in verse 40. Then shall 2 be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left behind. I mean, we all know about how that works. So I'm gonna pick this back up here in a minute. My video's getting a little too long. I know how YouTube hates my long videos, so I'll come back with a second part to this.